Pepper was extremely expensive. The Romans paid more for pepper than they did for slaves, especially unskilled or sick ones. Let that sink in. A pound of black peppercorns, basically dried berries from a vine, could cost you the equivalent of several months' wages for a skilled worker. Meanwhile, you could pick up a human being for a sack of black peppercorns. The priorities were clear. Flavor mattered more than ethics. This wasn't some quaint agricultural exchange. This was hardcore commerce, the kind where people got rich or died trying. Ships sank. Merchants lied. Governments taxed everything in sight. And at the center of it all was a supply chain stretching from the wet mountains of Kerala to the marbled dining rooms of Rome, powered by wind, greed, and a truly impressive level of risk tolerance. Here's what spices did for you in ancient Rome. They proved you were somebody. Sure, pepper and cinnamon made food taste better. Roman cuisine was heavy on fish sauce and olive oil, so a little exotic spice probably helped. But that's not really why people paid through the nose for it. They bought it because their neighbors couldn't afford it. Think of it like this. Some guy today drops 50 grand on a watch. Is it about telling time? Obviously not. His phone does that. It's about signaling. I have money to burn on something completely unnecessary. That was spices in Rome. Put cinnamon in your wine at a dinner party, and you're basically saying, I have connections to traders who sail to the edge of the known world, and I can afford their markup. They also convinced themselves spices were medicine. Pepper for digestion. Cinnamon for everything, apparently. Did it work? Probably not. But the placebo effect is real, and if you've paid a fortune for something, you're going to believe it's helping. The real kicker? Romans couldn't get it themselves. Everything came through middlemen, Arabian caravans, Persian traders, each one taking a cut. By the time a peppercorn reached Rome, it had been marked up more times than a Supreme hoodie on resale. The profit margins were insane. So was the frustration. Pliny the Elder, that grumpy Roman know-it-all, wrote screeds about how Rome was hemorrhaging gold to pay for spices. He considered it wasteful, ridiculous, a drain on the empire. And then, because Pliny couldn't help himself, he wrote detailed chapters about exactly which spices came from where and what they cost. The man was complaining and participating at the same time. Peak hypocrisy. Let's clear something up right now. India didn't need to be discovered. When Greek and Roman traders started showing up on the Malabar coast in the 1st century BCE, they found a thriving economy that had been running international trade for centuries. Indians had been growing pepper in the Western Ghats since before Rome was even a thing. They knew what they had. They knew what it was worth. Indian merchants were pros. They negotiated hard, controlled supply, and had trade networks stretching into Southeast Asia. When foreigners arrived wanting to buy in bulk, the Indians didn't roll over. They set the terms. They collected the taxes. They got rich. Ramala Thapar points out that India wasn't a passive supplier. It was a powerhouse, organized, sophisticated, running its own show. But there was still a logistics problem. How do you get tons of pepper from Kerala to Rome without losing half of it to middlemen, bandits, and bureaucratic nonsense? You sail, directly, if you can figure out how. Here's the official story. Sometime in the 1st century BCE, a Greek navigator named Hippolus discovered the monsoon winds and revolutionized trade. Direct routes across the Arabian Sea. No more hugging the coast. Genius. But here's the actual story. Sailors in the Indian Ocean had been using monsoon winds for a very long time. Local traders knew the pattern. Arabs knew it. Indians definitely knew it. What Hippolus, or whoever, actually did was figure it out as a Greek person and then get credited for it in Greek texts. This is how history works, by the way. Some guy from the right culture learns something everyone else already knows, and suddenly it's a discovery. The monsoons are predictable. Clockwork, almost. In summer, June to September, The southwest monsoon blows hard from Africa toward India. Strong, consistent winds that can push a ship across open ocean in a matter of weeks. In winter, November to February, the northeast monsoon reverses the flow, carrying you back west. Once you know this, you can time your voyages. Load up in Egypt in summer, sail to India, trade your goods, and catch the winter winds home. Round trip in a year, maybe less if you're lucky. Compare that to the overland route. Months of caravan travel, everyone taking a cut, and the economics are obvious. Egypt became the pivot point. Under Ptolemaic and then Roman control, it was the perfect bridge, Mediterranean on one side, Red Sea access on the other. Ships would dock at Red Sea ports, haul goods across the desert to the Nile, float them down to Alexandria, and ship them out to Rome. Was it comfortable? Absolutely not. The desert crossings were brutal, but it was faster and cheaper than the alternatives. Berenik is in the middle of nowhere. Seriously, it's on Egypt's Red Sea coast, in a stretch of desert that makes you wonder why anyone would build anything there. The answer, of course, is money. Founded by Ptolemy II way back in the 3rd century BCE, Berenik became one of the main ports for the India trade under Roman control. Archaeologists have been digging there for decades, and what they've found is fascinating. Indian pottery, teak wood from Kerala, actual peppercorns preserved in the sand for 2,000 years. Even a little statue of an Indian goddess, probably carried by a homesick trader. But let's not romanticize it. Life in Berenik was miserable. The heat was oppressive. Water was scarce. They had to dig deep wells and ration carefully. Disease was rampant. People were crammed into tight quarters, ships coming and going, bringing illnesses from across the ocean. Plenty of people died there, far from home, chasing a payday. But the money was real. Merchants would haggle over tariffs, bribe officials, cut deals in a chaos of languages: Greek, Latin, Tamil, Arabic. Ships would unload, camels would get loaded, and caravans would head out across the desert. The whole operation hummed with frantic energy because time was money, and monsoon seasons didn't wait for anyone. Another port, Myos Hormos, was similar. Warehouses packed with goods. Administrative buildings where Roman officials collected taxes on everything that moved. It was organized chaos, powered by the promise of massive returns. We know about it from the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, a 1st century Greek sailing manual written by someone who'd actually done the routes. It's not poetic. It's practical. It tells you where to go, what to expect, what's worth buying. And it describes Maziris as a major port, packed with ships from Egypt, dealing in bulk quantities of pepper and malabathrum. That's Indian bay leaf, another big seller. Large vessels are sent there, the text says, because the quantities of pepper were massive. This wasn't boutique trade. This was bulk commodity shipping. Archaeologists think they've found Maziris, or at least parts of it, near modern Pattanam in Kerala. They've dug up Roman amphorae, glass beads, coins. There's even mention in sources of a temple to Augustus, the Roman emperor, which suggests there was a resident Roman community. Traders living in India for months, maybe years, learning Tamil, eating local food, figuring out how to navigate a culture that wasn't theirs. The local rulers, the Chera kings, weren't pushovers. They welcomed the trade, sure, but they controlled it. They set taxes, regulated the ports, took their cut. They weren't being exploited. They were running a business. Imagine docking at Maziris after weeks at sea. You've survived storms, boredom, maybe pirates. You're exhausted. And then you step off the ship into humidity that hits you like a wall, the smell of pepper drying in the sun, boats made from coconut fiber. What? And people shouting in a language you don't understand. You need an interpreter. You need to negotiate prices. You need to not get scammed, which is easier said than done when you're a foreigner and everyone knows it. This was the ground-level reality, not grand cultural exchange, just commerce, sweat, and stress. There's this document called the Maziris Papyrus. It's a fragment, found in Egypt, dated to the 2nd century CE. It's basically a shipping invoice. And it's wild. It describes a cargo of pepper and other goods loaded at Maziris. The total value? Around 7 million sesterces. For context, a Roman soldier earned maybe 900 sesterces a year. This one shipment was worth more than 7,000 years of a soldier's wages. The document itemizes everything: goods, transport costs, taxes. It reads like a FedEx tracking page, except with camels. What it shows is that this was serious business, financed by serious money. Roman bankers in Alexandria would lend capital to merchants, who'd use it to buy goods in India, then repay with interest when the cargo sold. High risk, high reward. If your ship sank, and plenty did, you were ruined. If it made it, you were rich. The system kept running because enough voyages succeeded to justify the gamble. Pepper was the headline, but it wasn't the only thing moving. From India, black pepper, obviously. Cinnamon and cassia, though those came from further east and just passed through Indian ports. Ivory, tortoiseshell, precious stones, fine textiles, Indian cotton and muslin were luxury goods in Rome. Sometimes even live animals. Peacocks became a status symbol. Rich Romans kept them in gardens to show off. From Rome, gold. Mostly just gold. Roman gold coins, aurii, have been found in huge hoards across southern India. Thousands of them. Sometimes Indian rulers melted them down and reminted them. Other times they just kept them, maybe because they trusted Roman gold purity. Wine and olive oil made the trip too, in those big clay amphorae. Glass beads, which Indians liked. Coral, which had religious significance. But the trade balance freaked Romans out. Pliny and others complained constantly about the drain of gold to the east. They saw wealth flowing out and worried it was weakening the empire. There's probably some exaggeration there, moralizing mixed with economics, but the concern was real. India, meanwhile, seemed perfectly happy accumulating Roman gold. Why wouldn't they be? Look, it wasn't just goods. When people travel and trade, they talk. They share ideas, religions, art styles. It happens whether anyone plans for it or not. Buddhist imagery starts popping up in Roman art. Not a ton, but it's there. Greek astronomical concepts influence Indian mathematics. There's a Sanskrit word, yavnika, that literally means Greek woman or Greek, and it shows up in Indian plays. In Gandhara, modern Pakistan and Afghanistan, you get this incredible fusion art. Buddha statues carved in a style that looks almost Greco-Roman. Realistic faces, draped robes. But the subject matter is purely Indian. It's fascinating. It's also messy. People weren't sitting around having philosophical debates about cultural synthesis. They were doing business, and ideas just leaked through. Some Roman traders spending months in Maziris would pick up Tamil phrases. An Indian merchant in Alexandria would hear about Roman politics. Did it change their worldviews? Maybe. Did it lead to deep mutual understanding? Probably not. They were still trying to get the best deal. Let's get real about who these people were. The ship captains learning to read the monsoon winds. The sailors, probably a mix of Egyptians, Arabs, Indians, who spent months at sea for wages that were decent but not spectacular. The merchants gambling everything on a single voyage. The farmers in Kerala growing pepper, probably not thinking much about where it ended up. What did they fear? Storms, shipwrecks, disease, pirates, getting scammed, returning home empty-handed after investing everything. What did they want? Money, obviously. Also just not dying. Surviving long enough to see their families again. Mistakes were constant. Load your ship wrong, it capsizes. Misjudge the monsoon by a week, you're stranded or dead. Trust the wrong business partner, you lose your cargo. And yet they kept doing it. That tells you something about human nature. Or maybe just about how bad the alternatives were. These routes lasted centuries. 1st century BCE through the early medieval period, though the scale and players shifted over time. Eventually, Rome collapsed, or transformed, depending on your perspective. New powers emerged. Islam reshaped the region. But the routes didn't disappear. They evolved. When Portuguese sailors reached India in the late 1400s, they weren't discovering anything. They were rediscovering. The routes had been there all along. So here's the thing about pepper. We don't think about it anymore. It sits on every table. Costs almost nothing. No one would risk their life for it now. But 2,000 years ago, it was worth more than gold. People built fortunes on it. Governments taxed it. Empires depended on it. And all because someone figured out that if you sailed when the winds were right, you could cut out the middlemen and make an obscene amount of money. That's it. That's the story. Not a grand tale of cultural exchange, though that happened as a side effect. Just people chasing profit across an ocean, gambling on the wind, hoping they'd make it back alive and rich. Most of them didn't get rich. Some of them didn't make it back. But the ones who did, they changed the world. One shipment of pepper at a time. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.